What happens when a judge tries to humiliate the wrong woman? Imagine walking into a courtroom for something as small as a parking ticket, only to be publicly humiliated, fined, and arrested, just for being who you are. That's exactly what happened to Monica Reynolds, a powerful black federal prosecutor who found herself at the mercy of a racist judge with a history of abusing his authority. But here's the twist: he had no idea who he was dealing with. Stay with us until the end to see how Monica turned the tables and exposed corruption at the highest level. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today, and if you think justice was served. And if you love stories that inspire change, hit that subscribe button and join us at Inspiring Stories Told. The thick humidity of a New Orleans morning clung to the city like a damp veil, wrapping itself around the streets as the sun struggled to pierce through the heavy air. The scent of fresh beignets and strong coffee drifted from the French Quarter, mixing with the distant hum of streetcars rattling down St. Charles Avenue. Inside a sleek high-rise apartment, the steady buzz of an alarm clock cut through the early morning stillness. Monica Reynolds groaned softly, her body protesting against the pull of another demanding day. The weight of justice had settled on her shoulders long ago, and every morning she rose to carry it again. She stretched, her toned arms brushing against the stack of legal briefs and case files that lined the nightstand beside her bed. Law was not just her job, it was her life. At 37 years old, Monica had fought harder than most to claim her place in the halls of power. As an assistant United States attorney, she had built a reputation for being relentless, a force to be reckoned with in the courtroom. She had taken down corrupt politicians, ruthless crime lords, and human traffickers who thought they were untouchable. Her bookshelves bore the weight of legal tomes and framed degrees. Her walls displayed awards, and her desk overflowed with trial notes, all reminders of the battles she had won. Yet, no amount of success could shield her from what she was about to face. Today was supposed to be different. No high-stakes prosecution. No legal warfare. Just a simple personal matter, a wrongly issued parking ticket that should take no more than 10 minutes to resolve. She had parked legally. She had the photos to prove it. The thought of appearing in municipal court, a place where minor infractions were sorted out like assembly line justice, felt beneath her. But principle mattered. Dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored navy blazer, Monica grabbed her car keys and a travel mug of coffee, heading out. Then, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Robert Caldwell, her boss, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Louisiana. Her stomach tightened. He never called this early. "Monica, I need you on this now." His voice was sharp, cutting through the morning fog. "What happened?" she asked, immediately switching to crisis mode. "The defense just filed a last-minute motion in the Phillips trafficking case. If we don't counter it fast, they'll dismantle months of work. This is bad. Real bad." The Phillips case was huge, one of the biggest human trafficking trials in Louisiana's history. A powerful, well-connected businessman was accused of running a multi-state trafficking ring, and Monica was one of the lead prosecutors. A mistake now could let a monster walk free. She felt the shift immediately. Her personal errand faded into the background. "I'll take care of it," she said. Monica quickly pulled into a small cafe parking lot, balancing her laptop on the center console, fingers flying over the keyboard as she reviewed the motion. The legal arguments were dense, filled with twisted manipulations designed to poke holes in their case. She was in the zone, lost in strategy and counterpoints, building her argument line by line. Then she checked the time. Her heart sank. 8:50 a.m. She was supposed to be in court at 9 a.m. Her municipal hearing was just 10 minutes away, but in downtown New Orleans, finding parking was a war zone. Damn it. Monica snapped her laptop shut, hurriedly saved her notes, and pulled back onto the road. The courthouse was only a few blocks away, but traffic crawled, pedestrians flooded the crosswalks, and every street seemed to be at a standstill. By the time she finally found parking and rushed up the courthouse steps, it was 9:10 a.m. Not ideal, but not catastrophic. Or so she thought. The moment Monica pushed open the heavy courtroom doors, she felt the shift in the air. The clerk stopped typing. The courtroom chatter died down. And then, the judge stopped mid-sentence. Judge Harold Whitaker, a relic of the Old South, a man whose power sat heavy on his shoulders like a robe woven from generations of privilege, turned slowly toward her. His pale blue eyes locked onto her, cold and calculating. A chill ran down Monica's spine. Something about the way he looked at her was different from the way he looked at the white defendants seated before him. He took in her dark skin, her straight-backed confidence, her tailored blazer, and his lips curled slightly. Monica didn't blink. She had faced murderers, corrupt politicians, and criminals without fear. A judge with an overinflated sense of power was nothing. Or so she thought. "Ah," Whitaker said, leaning back in his chair. His voice dripped with condescension. "Another one who thinks the rules don't apply to her." A few quiet gasps rippled through the courtroom. Monica felt the heat of every set of eyes on her, watching, waiting to see how she would react. She forced herself to remain calm, composed, unshaken. "Your Honor," she began, keeping her tone professional. "My case was scheduled for 9 a.m. I apologize for my delay." "Apologies?" Whitaker cut her off. "You believe that's enough?" The tension tightened like a noose around the room. Monica could feel it now, the power game. She wasn't just another defendant in his courtroom. She was a black woman in a position of power, and that offended him. He wasn't just issuing a fine. He wasn't just enforcing the rules. He was making an example of her. "In my courtroom," he continued, "we respect the law. We respect punctuality. We do not stroll in when we feel like it. Do I make myself clear, Ms. Reynolds?" The words were sharp, cutting deeper than they should have. Monica felt a familiar, simmering anger coil in her chest. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles, and shattered too many barriers to be spoken down to like an unruly child. But she knew better than to lose her temper here. She had seen this game before. She knew how men like Whitaker worked, using power, humiliation, and intimidation to maintain control. So Monica stood taller. She kept her voice even, and she met his gaze head-on. "Crystal clear, Your Honor." For the first time, Whitaker hesitated. Because Monica wasn't scared. But he wasn't done yet. Not even close. This was just the beginning. And the real fight was about to start. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating, thick with unspoken words and barely concealed judgment. The weight of every pair of eyes pressing against Monica's back felt heavier than the Louisiana humidity outside. But she stood tall. Judge Harold Whitaker's cold gaze never left her. His lips curled in something between a sneer and a smirk. He had her exactly where he wanted her, not as a respected federal prosecutor, but as a black woman standing before him, subject to his authority. The air conditioning hummed, the only sound in the room as Whitaker dragged out the moment, savoring his power. Then, with deliberate slowness, he leaned forward, his old leather chair creaking under his weight. "Step forward." The words cut through the room like the sharp edge of a knife. Monica's hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palm. She had been in hundreds of courtrooms, had stood before some of the most intimidating judges in the country, but none had ever spoken to her like this. Like she was nothing. Like she was beneath them. But she was not some rookie lawyer trembling before a superior. She was Monica Reynolds. She took a slow, controlled breath and stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She refused to shrink. She refused to bow. From the corner of her eye, Monica saw the white businessman sitting in the second row, calmly flipping through his phone. He had strolled in 15 minutes late, and Judge Whitaker had barely glanced at him. No scolding. No lectures on respecting the law. Not even a raised eyebrow. She had seen it. Everyone in the courtroom had seen it. But none of them would speak up, because this was how the system worked. Whitaker picked and chose who deserved leniency. And today, Monica Reynolds was not one of them. She stood before the bench, her back straight, her expression unreadable. Judge Whitaker picked up his reading glasses, perched them on the edge of his nose, and shuffled through his papers as if she were an inconvenience he barely had time for. Finally, he looked up, his eyes dripping with condescension. "Well, Miss Reynolds," he said, emphasizing the miss, like it was an insult. "Do you think your time is more valuable than mine?" The courtroom shifted. A few heads turned. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Monica's jaw tightened. "Miss?" She had earned the title Attorney Reynolds. Federal Prosecutor Reynolds. She had gone toe-to-toe with some of the most powerful criminals in the state and won. And yet, here she was, being spoken to like a misbehaving student. Still, she refused to react. She knew what he wanted, a sign of weakness, a flash of anger, anything that would allow him to paint her as the angry black woman stereotype. Instead, she answered in the same professional tone she had perfected over years of trials. "Your Honor, I was delayed due to an urgent matter related to my duties as an assistant United States attorney." She could have left it there, but she didn't, because she had seen that white businessman walk in late, and she had seen Whitaker ignore it. So, with measured control, she added, "I notice others who arrived late were not addressed in the same manner." The moment the words left her lips, the air in the room changed. It was like a match had been struck, a single spark in a room filled with gasoline. Judge Whitaker's face darkened, his thin lips pulling into a tight line. For a moment, the courtroom held its breath. Then he laughed, a low, condescending chuckle that sent a shiver down Monica's spine. "Oh," he mused, leaning back as if amused. "You notice things, do you?" Monica didn't answer. Whitaker's smirk disappeared in an instant. His gaze turned sharp, like a blade pressing against her throat. "Miss Reynolds, I don't believe you're in a position to question how I run my courtroom." He picked up his gavel, rolling it between his fingers. "I have seen your type before." The words landed like a slap. "Your type." The room stiffened. Whitaker continued, his voice growing louder, ensuring everyone in the courtroom heard. "Self-important. Entitled. Thinks the law only applies when it's convenient." A wave of nausea rolled through Monica's stomach. This was not about tardiness anymore. This was about putting her in her place. Monica didn't flinch. She didn't let her expression crack. But inside, rage burned white-hot in her chest. Whitaker picked up a pen and scribbled something onto the docket. Then he slammed his gavel down. The sharp crack rang out like a gunshot. $1,000. Contempt of court. The gasps were audible. Even the court clerk, who had worked under Whitaker for years, froze, her fingers hovering over her keyboard in disbelief. A contempt fine. For what? For walking into a courtroom 10 minutes late? For not bowing her head like he wanted her to? Monica kept her breathing steady, but she could feel her pulse hammering against her ribs. Whitaker smiled, satisfied, as if he had just taught a child a lesson. "Perhaps next time," he said silkily, "you'll think twice before questioning my authority." Monica felt her fists tighten again. She had prosecuted men who had ordered hits on witnesses, who had bribed government officials, who had trafficked women and children across state lines, and even they hadn't made her feel as violated as she did now. This was not about the law. It was not about rules or order. This was about power, and he thought he had one. The frustration in the room was palpable. The audience felt every ounce of injustice. They saw the white businessman arrive later than Monica without a word of reprimand. They heard the judge call Monica your type. They watched as he fined her $1,000, not for tardiness, but for daring to hold her head high. The system was corrupt. The system was broken, and Monica Reynolds was living proof of it. She took a slow breath and straightened her spine. She would not crumble. She would not break. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Monica Reynolds just faced one of the most blatant abuses of power we've ever seen. Humiliated, fined, and treated like a criminal, all because a judge decided she needed to be put in her place. How does this make you feel? If this could happen to a high-ranking federal prosecutor, imagine what happens to those without power, without a voice. Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have risked everything to fight back? And here's the real question. What happens when a judge, drunk on power, pushes the wrong woman too far? Let us know in the comments below. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic beyond the thick courthouse walls, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside. Monica stood frozen at the podium, her ears still ringing from the unjust slam of the gavel. $1,000. Contempt of court. She had fought drug cartels. She had put men who ran human trafficking rings behind bars. And yet, here she was, being treated worse than a criminal for simply existing in the wrong courtroom, in the wrong skin, at the wrong time. Judge Harold Whitaker leaned back, satisfied, as if he had just won a game she never agreed to play. She should have let it go. She should have walked away. But she didn't. Because she knew what this was. She had seen this brand of power before. It wasn't about justice. It was about control. And she wasn't going to let it stand. With deliberate calmness, Monica reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her black leather credential holder. The gold seal of the United States Department of Justice caught the light, sending a small, gleaming reflection across the courtroom. She flipped it open, holding it up for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room. The clerk stopped typing. The bailiff straightened. Even the white businessman, still lounging in the second row, suddenly looked up from his phone, eyes widening. Judge Whitaker went pale. The color drained from his face, his once arrogant smirk disappearing in an instant. Monica held his gaze. Unmoving, unshaken, unapologetic. For the record, Your Honor, she said, her voice ringing through the courtroom, I am Assistant United States Attorney Monica Reynolds, Eastern District of Louisiana. The weight of her words crashed down on the room like a hammer. Whitaker blinked. For the first time since she entered his courtroom, he looked rattled. His fingers twitched on the armrest of his chair, his mind clearly scrambling to recover. Had I known, he began, but Monica cut him off. She took a step forward, her voice measured, powerful, and unwavering. It shouldn't matter, Your Honor. Whitaker's eyes flicked around the room, as if searching for an escape. But there was none, because now, the whole courtroom had seen the truth. This wasn't about lateness. It wasn't about respect for the law. It was about race. It was about power. And it was about a judge who thought he could humiliate a black woman just because he could. But now, that black woman was someone he could not afford to humiliate. For a moment, Monica thought she had won, that he would back down, that he would try to save face. But she had underestimated just how far a desperate man would go to protect his power. Whitaker licked his lips, his gaze sharpening, and then, just as quickly as his fear had appeared, it vanished. His pale face flushed red, but not with embarrassment. With fury. He wasn't backing down. He was doubling down. Ms. Reynolds, he spat, emphasizing the MS, again like a slap. I don't care if you work for the U.S. Attorney's Office, the governor, or the president himself. His fingers tightened around his gavel, his knuckles white. You have just disrupted my courtroom with theatrics unbecoming of an officer of the law. Monica's stomach turned. She knew what was coming next. Therefore, I am raising your contempt fine to $2,500. A collective gasp erupted. The clerk flinched. The bailiff hesitated. And Monica's blood turned to ice. But Whitaker wasn't finished. Because the fine wasn't enough. Because he needed to break her. Because she had made him feel powerless, and he needed to take it back. Furthermore, Whitaker continued, his voice like steel, I find your behavior today to be willfully disruptive and disrespectful to this court. The words sunk into Monica's skin like a knife. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. But then, I am ordering you into custody. The room exploded. A loud, stunned murmur spread through the courtroom like wildfire. The bailiff hesitated. For a split second, Monica saw it in his eyes. He knew this was wrong. But Whitaker was still his boss. And so, after a moment, the bailiff took a slow step forward. Monica braced herself. A deep, shaking breath. Then the cold snap of metal cuffs around her wrists. The room froze. She had put men in these cuffs. She had watched as criminals, murderers, traffickers had been let out of court just like this. But now it was her. And not for a crime. Not for breaking the law. But for daring to challenge it. As the bailiff gripped her elbow, leading her toward the courtroom exit, Monica kept her head high. She wouldn't give Whitaker the satisfaction of seeing her break, but she saw what was happening around her. The law student in the back row frantically texting, likely sending out what had just happened. The clerk with wide, horrified eyes, her hands shaking over her keyboard. The journalist scribbling so fast his pen nearly tore the paper. They all knew. And this wasn't going to be buried. Because what Whitaker had just done wasn't just a mistake. It was a declaration of war. And he had picked the wrong woman to go to war with. Do you think Judge Whitaker has gone too far? Will Monica's arrest spark the downfall of a corrupt system? Tell us in the comments. Stay tuned for the next part. The sound of the courtroom doors slamming shut behind Monica echoed in her ears long after she was led away in cuffs. She was used to seeing this view from the other side, standing tall as she prosecuted criminals who belonged behind bars. But now, she was the one in restraints, paraded like a criminal through the halls of justice. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed as she was marched down the corridor, her wrists burning where the cuffs dug into her skin. People stared. Some whispered. Others snapped photos, their camera flashes bursting like lightning against the cold, white walls. And then, just before she was forced into a holding cell, she caught a glimpse of Elena Chavez, the court clerk, watching from her desk, her hands trembling as they hovered over her keyboard. Something passed between them in that moment. A decision. A turning point. Because this wasn't going to be forgotten. And Monica Reynolds was not going to disappear. By the time Monica's mugshot was taken, her story had already hit the internet. At first, it was just whispers on legal forums, court observers typing hurried messages about what they just witnessed. But then Angela Carter saw it. Angela Carter wasn't just any journalist. She was the kind of reporter who dug until there was nothing left to uncover. A woman who had exposed police corruption in Baton Rouge, who had taken down a judge in Texas for accepting bribes. And when she saw the courtroom footage, the first thing she did was call her source at the courthouse. Tell me everything. Elena hesitated on the other end of the line. Angela, if I leak this, my job, forget your job, Angela interrupted. This is bigger than both of us. A long pause. Then a file appeared in Angela's inbox. And the moment she opened it, she knew the walls of Judge Whitaker's empire were about to come crashing down. By mid-afternoon, Angela Carter's breaking news report hit the internet like a tidal wave. The headline was unforgiving. Black federal prosecutor arrested in court after challenging racist judge. Within minutes, the hashtags #JusticeForMonica and #CorruptJudge Whitaker began trending. By nightfall, they were number one. Celebrities, politicians, civil rights organizations. They all saw it. They all shared it. And then, the floodgates burst open. Other victims of Judge Whitaker came forward. A black mother who was given a maximum sentence for a parking fine while a white man in the same situation was let off with a warning. A young Latino teenager whose bail was set 3 times higher than white defendants in similar cases. A public defender who had tried to call out Whitaker's bias 5 years ago, only to have his career destroyed for it. And each story fed the fire. This wasn't one bad ruling. This was a pattern of racism and abuse that had gone unchecked for years. And now, the whole world was watching. The morning after Monica's arrest, in a sleek downtown office, Judge Raymond Spencer, the head of the Judicial Review Board, stood by his window, watching the city below. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls from reporters. Calls from politicians. Calls from people who suddenly wanted to distance themselves from Whitaker. This was bad. Very bad. Shut it down, he snapped to his assistant, tossing the latest newspaper onto his desk. Now. How? The assistant stammered. The media already has it. Social media. Then discredit her, Spencer growled. Find something. Anything. Because if Whitaker went down, the whole system would be exposed. And they couldn't let that happen. But while Spencer plotted, Elena Chavez was making her own moves. She had worked under Whitaker for 5 years. She had seen too much. And she had kept records of it all. Now, she had a choice. Stay silent, keep her job, or blow the entire thing wide open. Her hand shook as she inserted the flash drive into her laptop. Click, click, click. File after file, document after document. And when she was done, she sent everything to Angela Carter. Angela stared at the files in disbelief. It was worse than she had imagined. The numbers didn't lie. Black defendants in Whitaker's courtroom were 3 times more likely to receive the maximum fine than white defendants. Latino defendants faced twice as many interruptions during their testimonies. White defendants were granted leniency in over 70% of cases where minorities were not. And this was just the last 5 years. Angela knew what this meant. Judge Whitaker wasn't just a bad judge. He was part of a system designed to oppress. And now, that system was cracking. By the time Angela published the court records, there was no saving Whitaker. The mayor of New Orleans issued a statement condemning him. The governor ordered an immediate investigation. The ACLU filed a formal complaint against the Judicial Review Board. And Monica Reynolds? She had just been released from custody, and the first thing she did? She walked straight to the cameras. The reporters swarmed, shouting over each other. "Ms. Reynolds, what do you have to say about your arrest?" She turned to the cameras. Her wrists were still red from the cuffs, but her voice was steady. "I say this isn't about me," she declared. "It's about every person who stood before Judge Whitaker and never had a voice." A hush fell over the crowd. It's about the thousands of people who have been crushed by a corrupt system, and it's about time that system is held accountable. The roar that followed was deafening. Because this wasn't just about one woman. This was about justice finally fighting back. Do you think Whitaker will escape justice? Or will Monica's fight bring him down for good? Comment yes or no below. And stay tuned for the next part. The storm that started in Judge Whitaker's courtroom had grown into a hurricane of national outrage. What had begun as an unjust contempt charge against Monica Reynolds had now spiraled into a full-scale investigation into judicial corruption. And the man who had once sat so high above others on the bench, he was about to fall. Marcus Bailey had been waiting for this moment his entire career. As a civil rights lawyer, he had spent years fighting against judicial bias, watching case after case get swept under the rug because the people in power refused to hold each other accountable. But not this time. Because this time, the world was watching. By Monday morning, the Department of Justice officially announced its investigation into Judge Harold Whitaker. By Tuesday afternoon, the Judicial Review Board shut down his courtroom indefinitely. By Wednesday, the FBI had launched a formal corruption probe. And by Friday, Judge Whitaker was sitting in a courtroom, but this time, he wasn't the one behind the bench. Monica sat in the same courthouse where she had been humiliated, arrested, and dragged out in cuffs just days before. But today, she wasn't a defendant. She was a witness. She sat tall, poised, and unshaken as the Judicial Review Board prepared to deliver their ruling. Judge Whitaker, on the other hand, he looked nothing like the powerful, arrogant man who had sneered down at her in contempt. His once pristine black robe was gone, replaced with a wrinkled navy suit, his hands clasped tightly together, pale and trembling. He had tried to fight back, tried to claim that Monica had disrespected his courtroom, tried to argue that his rulings were fair and impartial. But then, Angela Carter's investigation had revealed years of racial bias in his sentencing. Elena Chavez's leaked documents had proved he had unfairly fined, jailed, and dismissed defendants based on race. And the testimonies of dozens of his former victims? They had sealed his fate. The room held its breath as the head of the Judicial Review Board, a steely-eyed woman in a gray suit, read the final verdict aloud. After reviewing the overwhelming evidence of judicial misconduct, it is the ruling of this board that Judge Harold Whitaker be permanently removed from the bench, stripped of his judicial license, and barred from holding any legal office in the state of Louisiana. A wave of murmurs spread through the room. The mighty Judge Whitaker had just been brought to his knees. Monica exhaled slowly, letting the moment sink in. This was justice. And it wasn't just for her. It was for every person who had been silenced, humiliated, and denied fairness in his courtroom. Judge Whitaker's pale hands clenched into fists. He looked like he wanted to fight back, but there was nothing left to say. He had lost. Forever. And Monica? She was just getting started. The next day, Monica walked into the U.S. Attorney's office, not as a victim, but as a leader. She had been offered a new position, a seat on a national task force dedicated to reforming the judicial system. Her mission? To ensure that no one else would ever face what she had endured. She accepted without hesitation, because this fight was bigger than her. It was about fixing a system that had been broken for far too long. And if there was one thing she knew how to do, it was how to fight. The days of unchecked power were over. The days of silent suffering had come to an end. And Monica Reynolds? She was no longer just a federal prosecutor. She was a symbol of justice, of strength, of change. The next time she stepped into a courtroom, she wouldn't be defending herself. She'd be defending the people who needed her the most. And this time, the system would have no choice but to listen. Because now, the whole world was watching. And they weren't going to look away. What happened to Monica was not just a story. It was a reality for countless others who don't have the power to fight back. But now, change has begun. Judge Whitaker was removed. The system was forced to reckon with its corruption. And Monica Reynolds? She took her pain and turned it into a movement. Because justice isn't given. It's demanded. And when enough people stand together, the system has no choice but to change. Monica Reynolds' journey was not just about one courtroom or one corrupt judge. It was about something much bigger, a battle that has existed for generations. A battle against bias, against power being abused, against a system that has too often worked against the very people it is supposed to protect. But Monica did something powerful. She stood up when she could have stayed silent. She fought back when she could have walked away. She demanded justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced before her. And because she did, a corrupt judge was taken down. A flawed system was exposed. And most importantly, a movement was started, one that doesn't end here. But let's be honest, Monica's fight isn't just hers to bear. It belongs to all of us. Because every time a person is denied fair treatment in a courtroom, every time power is used to silence instead of serve, and every time someone is judged not by their character but by their race, gender, or background, this fight continues. So what can we do? We speak up. We support those who stand for justice. We hold people accountable, whether they sit on a courtroom bench, wear a badge, or hold a position of authority. And most importantly, we don't look away. Because when we ignore injustice, we allow it to thrive. If this story made you angry, if it made you think, if it made you want to see real change in the world, then this is just the beginning. Hit the like button to show your support for Monica and everyone who has ever faced injustice. Let the world know you stand on the side of fairness, equality, and truth. Subscribe to the channel to be part of something bigger, to hear more stories that expose real problems, that give a voice to those who have been silenced, and that inspire change. Because this isn't just entertainment. It's a movement. And with every story we tell, with every truth we expose, with every person who listens and takes action, we get one step closer to a world where justice truly is blind. The next time you walk into a courtroom, a police station, a job interview, or even a school, remember Monica's story. And if you ever find yourself facing injustice, remember that you are not alone. Because people like Monica, like you, like us, will never stop fighting. What are your thoughts on Monica's story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice like this? Drop a comment below. We want to hear from you. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Justice doesn't wait. And neither should we. See you in the next one.